US Robinson-Patman Act of 1936 is also called the Anti-Price Discrimination Act, and it was passed to make it illegal for a product supplier to charge different prices to different customers. So a company that makes candy bars would not be allowed to charge one price to most of their customers, all the smaller and mid-sized convenience stores and mom-and-pop grocery stores, for instance, and then a lower price, a discounted price to the big stores, the Walmarts and Amazons of the world. The concern was that these larger players, which at the time this law was passed, were burgeoning grocery stores like the A&P, would be able to achieve a monopolistic position in the market for these goods, these slightly lower prices giving them one more advantage over their smaller competitors. During the 4 decades or so of this act's enforcement, small grocery stores had prices that were on average about 1% higher than those offered by their large competitors, and the 8 largest grocery store chains only captured about 25% of all grocery sales in the US. Essentially every city and town of any size had at least one small grocery store, and most of them had several during this period. It was a very competitive market. During the Reagan administration of the 80s, though, enforcement of this act was abandoned, as the folks in charge of that enforcement were convinced this law was holding back growth. They saw it as a handout to small businesses at the expense of big business. So while it technically remained on the books, they just stopped enforcing it, and the big businesses in these spaces got that message pretty quickly. Walmart was the first big business to really lean into the new powers afforded them by this fresh governmental stance, and that led to it becoming the country's largest grocery store chain by 2001. And other big grocery brands like Kroger and Safeway began to do the same, consolidating all of their distributed regional buying into one big purchase so they could put in huge orders like Walmart was able to put in, and that allowed them to demand lower prices from their suppliers, which in turn allowed them to dramatically increase profits and gobble up their smaller competition, all of which led to the emergence of food deserts across the country, a term that was coined in 1995 to refer to areas where there are simply no grocery stores within a reasonable distance, even of relatively large populations of people, because smaller grocery stores can no longer compete, even when they are kind of the only player in town. Folks have to travel to the larger chain stores and have no real options closer to home, which can result in food precariousness and situations in which the only nearby food options are really unhealthy ones, the snacks at gas stations, for instance. This same general pattern played out across all retail spaces, including pharmacies and bookstores and athletic supply stores. And between 1982 and 2017, the total market share of independent retailers in the United States dropped from 53% to 22%. Which in some ways is great at the federal level as, and this is what the Reagan administration seemed to want back in the 80s, big businesses can grow a lot faster and bigger than small businesses, and that can lead to outsized GDP numbers and other such macro-scale figures. Unfortunately, while independent retailers tend to keep nearly half of the revenue they pull in within their local community, major chain stores only keep something like 14% of that revenue within the local community. So the shift from independent to chain retailers has had a deleterious impact on communities across the United States in the sense of having less competition, having food and other sorts of product deserts, and in terms of tax revenues and overall economic wealth being sapped from these areas and moved to other places, creating some relatively few winners and a whole lot of losers in the process. What I'd like to talk about today is another type of variable pricing, this one more directly aimed at consumers and enabled, at least in its modern incarnation, by big data and the devices we use every day. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. I'm able to keep this show ad-free because of support from listeners like you. If you're finding value in what I'm doing here, consider becoming a paid supporter for the cost of a cup of coffee each month at letsknowthings.com. And as a thank you for your helping me keep this show solvent, you'll receive an additional bonus More Things episode each month. All right, let's get back to the show. Dynamic pricing refers to changing the price of goods or services based on all sorts of variables. Demand or surge pricing, for instance, might see the price of a bus ticket or rideshare ride with Uber cost more during rush hour. The idea being that there are only so many bus seats and only so many available rideshare vehicles to go around, and when everyone is either trying to get to work or get home from work, there will be a lot more people wanting these finite number of seats and rides than there are seats and rides available. Upping the prices on these things, then, is a means of determining who wants these things the most, because they are willing to pay, at times, massively inflated prices for something that would cost far less in an hour or two once the rush has subsided. Similar price inflation occurs during peak energy use periods, and energy companies usually explain this price bump by suggesting that it encourages their customers to use more energy when it's abundant and cheap, and to use less of it when it is scarce and expensive. On very hot days when everyone is using their air conditioners to stay cool, then, inflated energy prices might encourage them to be less aggressive with their air conditioning settings, keeping their indoor temperatures at a more reasonable level, which in turn ensures there's more energy available on the grid for everyone and less risk of brownouts and blackouts. This pricing strategy is often seen by those on the receiving end of these price bumps as price gouging, which refers to companies taking advantage of temporary variables to massively inflate their prices, at times to abusive-seeming levels that they can justify by pointing at those variables and a desire to moderate supply and demand. So if there's a big convention in town, local hotels can argue that they are doubling or tripling their prices because there are not enough rooms for everyone who wants rooms on those days. But this could also be construed as a money grab. These hotel companies, knowing that some people won't be able to avoid paying for a place to stay during the convention that they have to attend, so they are taking advantage of customers who have no choice but to pay up. We saw similar dynamics play out globally during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when folks who had high-quality masks on hand were able to charge incredible sums for those masks because production had not yet scaled up. So they were relatively scarce and thus precarious, and these people and companies with the right product at the right time knew they could get away with charging many times the actual sticker price of that product, because some people would feel they had no choice but to pay it. Each situation of this kind will feel reasonable and suitable for the supply-demand situation to some people, and completely unreasonable and abusive to others. And it's possible to have a bit of both in many such situations. The companies in question actually do want to manage a scarce supply of something, but they're also keen to make as much money as possible while doing it because of their very nature. Dynamic pricing has become even more common in online marketplaces like Amazon, where it's not just holidays or events or the sudden emergence of global pandemics that can impact demand and thus the prices retailers can get away with charging would-be customers. Amazon has algorithms that keep track of what competitors are charging for the goods they offer, what sort of demand the market is seeing for said goods, what inventory looks like, if they have a lot or very few of something available to sell, and all sorts of other factors that might reasonably impact the price of a product even a little bit. As of 2024, the price of a product listed on Amazon changes several times a day, in some cases every 10 minutes, and they make about 2.5 million price changes every single day, adjusting for those aforementioned micro-scale variables on a product-by-product basis, but also making adjustments to their entire catalog so that relatively few uncommon goods have higher prices compared to their competitors, but common goods that people are most likely to search for have lower prices, which means customers shopping around will tend to see Amazon's lower-priced goods more often than the higher-priced ones, which in turn can adjust their perception of Amazon as a company and its marketplace in a favorable direction, perceiving them to have lower-priced goods on average. Amazon also has access to just a silly amount of data about their customers, some of it scooped up while we surf their sites, some bought from other data aggregators, and this allows Amazon, just like most tech companies and retailers these days, to track our behavior watching what we click, how long we linger on different products or product types, noticing our searches, and contextualizing all of it with where we live, what we've purchased in the past, and so on. The company is not very transparent about how it uses all this personal data, but while it's been speculated that they might adjust prices based on our individual profiles, most evidence suggests that they primarily use it to determine what we are shown, what products are promoted to us, as opposed to setting the prices on those products based on what it thinks we will pay as individuals. The same generally seems to be true of other retailers right now, though there are concerns that this might change at some point in the near future as new technologies, many of them based on AI, enable the more rapid and sophisticated crunching of data and the consequent individualization of prices, even potentially in person. US airline Delta, for instance, recently announced that it would be using AI to help it boost profits by charging different customers different prices for the same airline seat. These prices would be based on their customer profile, which means all the data scooped up by Delta from various sources, including things like past purchases, regular flight schedules, and how much money their systems think each customer makes and thus has available to spend. The president of the company said on a recent earnings call that they've been running a pilot project for this approach that resulted in about 3% of ticket sales being sold based on this model over the past 6 months. And by the end of the year, their goal is to increase that to 20% of tickets using this approach. In theory, this sort of system could be good for some customers some of the time because it could drop prices on tickets that customers wouldn't want to or wouldn't be able to pay for otherwise. If I'm considering a trip that requires a flight somewhere, but the tickets are more expensive than I want to or could pay, these systems could theoretically recognize this and offer them to me at a price that I can afford and that I would want to pay. And that would lead to more ticket sales and thus, conceivably, higher profits. The evidence on the ground with these sorts of systems usually points at price increases, not decreases, though. The companies use these models to see how much they can get per unit, how much they can get away with charging, rather than using them to sell more units at lower profit margins. In other words, it is usually wealthier consumers who get the better deals from these types of systems, as these companies want to keep those customers coming back, spending larger sums of money on glitzier products and upgrades and services over time, while poorer consumers tend to have fewer options and will thus tend to pay whatever they're told they have to pay because they have no choice. Delta spent most of July 2025 trying to control the backlash that erupted following that earnings call, and they are now saying to the press, but also in formal letters to government watchdogs who expressed concerns about what they said they planned to do, that no, you misunderstood us, maybe we misspoke, we are not using individualized data to set prices, it's all good, please don't worry about it. That announcement from Delta came shortly after lawmakers announced they would be pushing to get a new act, the Stop AI Price Gouging and Wage Fixing Act, passed into law. And though some U.S. senators have said they will block such efforts by Delta, other airlines, including Azul, WestJet, Virgin Atlantic, and Viva Aerobus, are also clients of the Israeli company Fetcher that Delta has been working with to run their AI pricing pilot program. And representatives from Fetcher have claimed that this pricing model is simply irresistible to those in charge of these companies. It will earn them so much more money than they're capable of earning with a non-dynamic pricing setup. So it will probably take over the airline industry relatively quickly, and they plan to expand into other industries beyond the airlines in the near future as well. These sorts of pricing models are not typically very popular with customers, no matter how irresistible they might be to the people in charge of these companies, and efforts by Walmart and other big grocery chains to remove static in-store pricing labels and replace them with digital versions, or in some extreme cases to remove them entirely and rely on apps on customers' phones to show the prices of goods, raised similar alarm bells, as dynamic pricing can allow the store to more rapidly change their prices based on demand, like Uber's surge pricing model, but maybe applied to flour or cough medicine instead of rideshare seats. And in-app pricing could allow them to show different prices to different people shopping for the same thing at the same time. Again, based on income, based on buying patterns, and so on. Walmart and everyone else dabbling in this space has, like Delta, claimed they intend no such dynamism in their pricing, even as their CEOs in some cases continue to brag to investors on earnings calls and otherwise about the possibilities. As a result, there seems to be a decent chance we will see the large-scale deployment of these sorts of models in at least some customer-facing industries within the next year or two, some company or another deciding to more fully test the regulatory environment and the regulatory establishment's appetite for challenging this kind of push into a new pricing paradigm that would theoretically at least allow these big companies to earn even higher profits and to grow even larger. The book I want to recommend today is called How the World Became Rich: The Historical Origins of Economic Growth by Mark Koyama and Jared Rubin. This book reminded me in some ways of Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond because it provides a large framework, and much of it seems very reasonable about something that I think a lot of us wonder about: why certain parts of the world became rich, why other parts did not become as rich, but why enrichment continues to happen in many different ways by many different metrics. And some of the explanations seem kind of like just so stories to me, where sure, they're possibly reasonable explanations, but they're also a bit cherry-picked. But the larger framework and explanation and some of the bigger systems that they point out do seem to provide reasonable explanations for why much of this enrichment has happened and why it has happened in the way that it has happened. Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider picking up a copy of How the World Became Rich by Mark Koyama and Jared Rubin. Let's Know Things is a listener-supported show. I don't make any money from ads, only what listeners contribute by becoming paid supporters at letsknowthings.com. If you're not in the position to become a paid supporter at the moment, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your pods. Those help get the show in front of more people and lend a hint of credibility to independently made shows like this one. A huge thanks in advance, whatever shape your support might take.